Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So, today we're going to be discussing the suspension, or rather the removal of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party. So, it has now been over 2 weeks since Mr. Corbyn was suspended, and his suspension has ignited much debate within the political domain as well as outside of it. So, this is definitely a historical event in time, which will have to be referred to in discussion of British politics and the histories of the modern British Labour Party. So, what I'll be doing today, I'll be reporting on the suspension as well as the actions which have followed it. So, let's get into it. So, Mr. Corbyn was suspended from the Labour Party on the 29th of October for his response to the Equality and Human Rights Commission's report on anti Semitism in the Labour Party. The report found that the Labour Party had breached the Equality Act on 3 separate accounts. It was reported that these breaches included the unlawful harassment of individuals, political interference, and the failure to provide adequate training for those handling the complaints. Thus, as a result, the report held the former Labour leader, Mr. Corbyn, accountable, concluding that there was a failure of leadership. Responding to the report, Mr. Corbyn acknowledged that it did take longer for the party to deal with the issue than it should have. He said, "It took longer to deliver that change than it should. One anti-Semite is one too many, but the scale of the problem was also dramatically overstated for political reasons by our opponents inside and outside the party, as well as by much of the media." Jeremy Corbyn was asked to retract his statement, and when he refused to do so, he was suspended by the Labour General Secretary, David Evans, with the full support of Keir Starmer. Mr. Corbyn's whip was removed, signalling the dissolution of the political power of Corbynism within the Labour left. The grassroots organisation Momentum called the suspension an anti-democratic attack on the political left. Upon his removal, but of course before it too, we can look back at the previous general election and the 2017 general election as well, Mr. Corbyn has been represented as a figure or leader of the political left who has enabled the rise of anti-Semitism in politics. He has been, as the media have delighted in calling it, shamed on what Keir Starmer called the Day of Shame. He's ultimately been branded a racist or an anti-Semite, and his name these days is almost synonymous with anti-Semitism in its association. Just have a look at the Guardian headline on the screen. Yeah, so it's as if the removal of Corbyn sees the removal of anti-Semitism. It's all about him. Yeah? Anti-Semitism is all about him. Also, look at the propaganda-like images which have been shared by the Conservatives on their Twitter page. With the comparison drawn here, Labour is reduced down to the level of the far-right group, the BNP. The BNP does not care for the human rights of people from ethnic backgrounds. They especially do not care for the rights of migrants. In sharp contrast, Jeremy Corbyn is a member of parliament who has dedicated his entire life towards fighting for equality for all ethnic groups, both inside and outside of the state of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Since he joined the Labour Party in 1983, he has campaigned tirelessly for social political justice, and he has respected and fought for the human rights of all people. Back in the 80s, he demonstrated against the South African apartheid. And an article published on the 11th of November by the Jacobins, the article was written by Ronnie Castrils, actually reveals and reports on the amount of support that Jeremy Corbyn currently has from South Africans who are reportedly deeply disturbed at the Labour Party's treatment and suspension of Jeremy Corbyn. So many South Africans are standing in solidarity with Corbyn. Corbyn has also supported the Palestinian cause, which is, the whole Palestine-Israel situation is basically like the new apartheid of today. He voted against the Iraq War, and he voted against British intervention in the Syrian War. So, respect for human rights. His record says it all. Just days before his suspension, Corbyn delivered a speech which supported and echoed the decolonise the curriculum movement, urging that children should be taught about empire and citing and referencing the talent of writers from Africa and the Caribbean and others and beyond as well. In his speech, he referred to the systemic injustices faced by Black individuals in Britain today in 2020. He also spoke about the Black Lives Matter movement as a movement which is here to stay rather than a moment, as others have called it. Recently, through social media, Corbyn has also used his Labour influence to campaign for the protection of human safety and freedoms. He's raised awareness of the Chiz Bill, or the Spy Cops Bill, which he had voted against. And at the time that he was speaking, 14th of October, the bill was due to again pass through Parliament. So you can take a look into that, the Spy Cops Bill. Many anticipated that Corbyn's suspension would instigate a civil war within the fractured Labour Party, despite Keir Starmer saying that this would actually put an end to the factionalism within the party. We may observe that the factionalism would perhaps only end once the Corbyn loyalists or the Corbynistas leave the party. A self-removal which Mr. Corbyn has encouraged that they do not do. He has encouraged the Labour left to stay within the party and represent and continue to fight for the many and not the few. Thus, he has encouraged that true Labour roots are retained within the Labour Party. The Labour Party was, after all, founded for this reason, arising from the trade unionist movement, which was of course, established to give political power and political voice to the many working class people within British society. So, the Labour Party was established for this reason, to benefit lives of the majority. Many reports highlight the hurt felt by the Jewish community on this day of shame, and of course before this day of shame. But some hurt also comes from Jewish Corbyn supporters who believe that they have been, in fact, left out of this discussion. Take a look at this article on the screen. The article is written by Lynn Siegel, and she is a Jewish MP. She's a Jewish MP who has been within Jeremy Corbyn's constituency for 40 years. Lynn Siegel said that it has been unbearable to witness the suspension of Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party. She said, this is what she says, let me just get up the quote. She says, "We have had to watch a wholly false but soon unstoppable invention of charges of anti-Semitism against our MP. with our own views as Jewish members completely ignored. So it is true that, there's going to be different opinions coming from the Jewish community. But, some members of the Jewish community feel that they have been ignored. And it is thus important not to homogenize and to put all Jewish people into one box and say this is how they feel about such issues. It's also important to report on the hurts also felt by Jewish people who support Corbyn. Okay, so members of the Labour left who belong to the Socialist Campaign Group met on November the 4th and released a statement entitled Reinstate Jeremy Corbyn, Unite to Fight the Tories. Okay, so I'll read a little bit of the statement. The statement reads, "We oppose the suspension of former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and call for his suspension now to be quickly reversed. The publication of the EHRC report ought to have been an important moment for the Labour Party to reflect and move forward together in the battle against anti-Semitism. Instead, we now face chaos and a division in the party, with a former Labour leader suspended, demoralising many members who the party needs to be active in their communities in the fight against the Tories." So that is just an extract from the statement released. MPs whose names were listed in the statement include Diane Abbott, Taher Ali, Afsana Begum, Ian Burn, Rebecca Long Bailey, John McDonnell, Bell Ribeiro-Addy, and Zara Sultana. A Reinstate Jeremy Corbyn petition was also released online last week. The petition simply reads, "We call for Jeremy Corbyn to be reinstated into the Labour Party." MPs such as Diane Abbott and Zara Sultana have shared it on social media. It is also interesting to see how those who share this petition and those MPs that stand by Mr. Corbyn have been represented in the media. So just take a look at this article. So we've got an article here which reports on Diane Abbott's sharing of the petition. "Bring back Corbyn!" exclamation mark. Abbott orders supporters sign letter to reinstate ex-Labour leader. It's really interesting because not once in Diane's tweet did I hear her exclaim or did I hear her shout. Yeah, what's the need for that exclamation mark, that exclamatory sentence? Yeah, she wasn't shouting. And she didn't order anyone either. She said, "Please share," in a very neutral tone. Yeah, so although this is a tabloid paper, it is a middle market newspaper. So we might expect more of an objective and less sensational tone from this newspaper in question. Yeah? And of course, this is a Black Labour MP who has been negatively represented in the media many times before. So this is only adding to such negative representation. There. Questions. Ahead of the Reinstate Jeremy Corbyn online event, which was held on the 9th of November, which was this past Monday, Keir Starmer was asked about the suspension of Corbyn from the Labour Party whilst appearing on Leading Britain's Conversation, LBC. Starmer said that he completely stands by the decision. He said It is quite something when the EHRC, which was set up by a Labour government, finds the Labour Party in breach of the law that the Labour government passed. I personally think it's quite interesting, it's quite something that this EHRC was set up by Tony Blair in 2006. Equality Human Rights Commission. Equality Human Rights, Tony Blair. Interesting. Okay, so Baroness Shami Chakrabarti has been reportedly working on a legal case to revoke the suspension of Corbyn. Again, whilst appearing on this show, in response to this apparent legal case, Starmer said, "I don't want to see any Labour Party money or time tied up with yet more legal cases." And he vowed to speak to Shami. He said, I will talk to Shami about this when I next see her. Despite Starmer saying this, members of the Labour left, or Corbyn's allies, were not deterred, and at the online event they called for clarity on which laws Mr. Corbyn had broken in warrant of his suspension. It seems as if by doing this, MPs are actually risking their own presence within the Labour Party. On the 12th of November, the Labour list reported that members of Parliament have been threatened with investigation for considering or discussing the motions on the Jeremy Corbyn suspension within local party business. In a report updated on the 13th, it is quoted that some members of local parties have, in fact, now been suspended. David Evans has warned that local parties are not to have discussions about or pass motions in relation to any aspect of individual disciplinary cases. Jeremy Corbyn is currently working as an independent member of Parliament. And following his removal, he has debated on the displacement of the Rohingya people, reminding the international community that support must be provided and human rights must be protected. He's therefore continuing to put the humanism in politics, raising awareness of the crisis and the displacement of a group of people. The Labour Party is required to respond to the EHRC's unlawful acts notice by the 10th of December. Page 6 of the report states that the Labour Party must now produce an action plan to address the EHRC's findings and recommendations. They write that the new leadership under Keir Starmer has already publicly committed to implementing our recommendations in full. It must now put this into practice. So, already, the adverb already is quite interesting here, I think. It emphasizes Starmer's enthusiasm and ability and credibility and his great leadership qualities and his ability to now move into a new era. That new era being a new Labour era. And yes, you could say that I've used new deliberately here because Keir Starmer reminds so many of us of Tony Blair. With Tony Blair, of course, supporting Mr. Corbyn's suspension. Just to conclude, media attention often compares the end of the Corbyn era to the 1930s Labour Party and their catastrophic defeat. But in terms of history in terms of the history of the Labour Party, there are also many other historical repetitions which we can also draw upon and notice. We can think about histories of suppression. We can think about histories of populist leadership and so much more. In all of this, it is important that we stand on the side of human rights, equality, and social justice. stand on the side of human rights, equality, and social justice.